Here we go. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Chit Chat Live. I'm Valerie Eichler Lair, your host, as you saw in the introduction. And with me tonight, I have my dear buddy in South Carolina. Last week, I pronounced it North Carolina. Oops, I was just making sure you all knew and test you. But Sherry Hudson-Passy, who's also a professional genealogist. Hi, Sherry.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. I'm good. And I'm so excited. Thank you so much, Sherry. We have a special guest tonight, and it is Angela Walton Raji, who's from Maryland. So, hi and welcome to Chit Chat Live, Angela.
Hello, and thank you for having me. It is great to be here.
Well, it's wonderful to have you because I have to admit that I love the show, the episode that we're going to be chatting about, but I wanted to have someone that had more experience and so forth. So I'm so glad that you're here. Thank you so much. And so that I'm not the big bad guy, I'm going to set the timer for our 30-minute chat because we could go on forever and ever, right, Sherry?
We sure could.
So before we get into what we're going to chat about, Angela, please tell us and our listeners a little bit about yourself.
Well, I've been doing genealogy, I guess I'll say continuously since 1991. And back in those days when I was the university administrator, even times when I was probably not doing what I should have been doing, even then I was doing genealogy. You know how it grabs a hold of you. And but I live in Maryland, but I'm originally from Western Arkansas and Eastern Oklahoma. You may have heard of my hometown, Fort Smith, Arkansas, home of Judge Parker, the hanging judge. Yes, that's my hometown. And all of the U.S. deputy marshals and just about anyone around Fort Smith, whether you're from the Arkansas side or Oklahoma side, we have cowboys, Indians, outlaws, and marshals, and I have them all in my family. So, but it's a pleasure to be here.
Awesome. And I know that you do a podcast. And
yes, I do.
You also are in the Black Pro Genealogy.
Well, Black Pro Gen, which is a biweekly online chat, also here on YouTube. And my podcast is the African Roots Podcast, and I have over 400 broadcasts up, and I'll be uploading one tomorrow, in fact. So I keep busy. Yeah.
Good. And so on the podcast, do you give some methodology and help to people in doing their ancestry and research and stuff?
I talk about a number of things from methods, latest books, items in the news, genealogy news, and other things that are going on, upcoming events and conferences as well. So it's a potpourri. It's a mixture of a lot of things. And of late, I've had a colleague join me, Dr. Shelley Murphy. She and I talk about our process of, as we say, digging the roots.
Yes. Yeah, I know Shelley. So great. Great.
Shelley and I are cousins. We're figuring it out, but we're cousins somewhere.
Great.
Awesome. Well, we'll have to do an episode or a chat about how you connected and how you found that out.
That would be fun.
Yeah. Well, again, thank you so much, Sherry, and I'm glad you're here. And also, I'm glad that you had Angela be available tonight to also talk. We're going to chat about episode 4 of Finding Your Roots, and the episode featured Ava DuVernay and Ta-Nehisi, got it right, Coates, and Janet Mock. And Ava, she was in the movie, or she directed the movie Selma. I didn't know who any of these celebrities were, so I took some notes. Angela, when you get to know me, you know I take notes.
No problem. All genealogists do.
Yeah. And so I was so interested in all three of them and the records and what they talked about and so forth. But I'd like to have Angela give us an idea. You know, you can talk about each individually from the episode or all together, but give us a feel for what they probably had to do the research for these 3 celebrities.
Well, I think one of the things that's most important, whenever I teach a class, I always tell people to pay attention to certain facts about the target family. And what I mean by facts, it encompass the geography. Certainly, we know from Janet Mock's story, certainly one has to look at what was going on in her native Hawaii and to really focus on certain things that will be unique to that area geographically. Obviously, with individuals, I believe Miss DuVernay, Ava DuVernay, of course, she has roots in New Orleans, and New Orleans, an incredibly rich place in terms of doing research. Rich history, colorful city, one of my favorite cities. And of course, looking at Ta-Nehisi Coates, which some may say, well, maybe his is more traditional, whatever that may mean, in terms of African American genealogy. But in terms of the process for each of them, the process is the same. Certainly, you know, after collecting a certain amount of data, obviously from each guest, oral history data perhaps that they were able to share, then of course one rolls up one's sleeves and looks for the records. We know what they are. From those vital records, there you go, vital records, census records. And of course, we look at anything and everything else, whether we're using military records, newspaper clippings, all of those things that are going to help us shape that family narrative. The process is the same. Now, of course, one does have, when in researching people of African ancestry, one does have the challenge when you reach a certain era, looking at pre-Civil War era, the era of enslavement. And there is a challenge. And of course, there's a lot of discussion in terms of the use of slave census records of the slave schedule.
Right,
and we can talk about that.
Yes, I was going to ask you. Yes, I was going to ask you how you felt about those, especially without showing anything else other than the slave record to try to prove a connection.
Well, first of all, one must understand, as genealogists, we look for proof.
Yes.
And that evidence of that's going to come off that page. And let me just sort of flip it and turn it back. You may have immigrant ancestors, is that correct? Either of you, both of you perhaps. Someone may have arrived and there may be a ship manifest that you use to say, this is when they arrived in America. Imagine that ship manifest and you're diligently following the rules and you get to, well, they arrived in this country in 1902 and here's a ship manifest from 1902, and my grandmother always said that her mother arrived when she was 16 years old. And you find this ship manifest that are the same date, the same year that she arrived, but there are no names. You just see a list of passengers. Oh, here's the 16-year-old female who arrives from Liverpool.
Absolutely. You never say that was my ancestor.
And would you dare, if you had a client who is paying you to do research, point that manifest to your client and say she was 16 and she came in 1902? Well, here's a list of people who got off a ship in 1902, and there's a female who is 16. We think that is your ancestor. This might be. You would never do that.
Never.
I want to go like this. We're done.
Or the client might say, give me my money back.
Exactly.
But, I think that probably is the concern. Also, it's important to understand that the slave schedules of 1850 and 1860, the 2 years that they existed, they're not a list of slaves. The names are the names of the slaveholder.
True.
It is a list of slaveholders, not a list of the enslaved. So now, well, what are the records where one may find them? Well, I will say, first of all, put on the brakes. Between 1860 and 1870, a lot happened. There was a war. Thousands of people died in that war. And the result of that war brought about the abolition of the institution of slavery. It's called the 13th Amendment. That was the official act that abolished the institution. But between we'll say April 1861 to be exact, and 1870, the glorious year, the glorious census year, that many people find their ancestors for the first time, many, because there were some who were there in 1860. But between those years, first of all, before you even look for the slaveholder, there's a story to tell. How did freedom come? How did your ancestor react, cope? How did that person negotiate pay for the first time when they were never allowed to read, to write, to count, to understand currency? Well, there was something called a bureau. And the bureau has left millions of records.
Yes.
Did they live near a bureau office? We've created, Tony, Carrier, and myself have created a finding aid for you. Well, find your ancestors where they lived and draw sort of a circle around it and look at the various field offices. Perhaps your ancestor used one of those services, and you will find names, not lines with no names.
Right.
You will find names of people. Did they live in one of the 37 cities that had branches of the Freedmen's Bank? If so, this happened all between the end of the Civil War and 1870 census. So there are a lot of records to look for to reflect those early days of freedom. Was an ancestor among the 170 plus Black Union Army regiments?
Yes.
Did they serve? You might be able to look up their service record, and if they lived beyond the Civil War or their widow, you might find a Civil War pension record, and we know what a gold mine those are. We know how rich they are.
Yes.
So that's the resources right there that are amazing. Now, depending on your state, did your state have a state census? Well, let's take randomly the state of Alabama. Look at the state of Alabama. They had a state census. And guess what? When you go to the census, at the very end, you see the colored census. 1866. You see various states that had their own state census.
Yes.
We're talking just with those 4 collections, millions of names on hundreds of thousands of pages before one even begins to look for a slaveholder.
Yes.
Well, so there's a lot.
And you mentioned those. So, and after, even before 1870, between that time period, you said there's court records.
Absolutely.
There's
and don't ever eliminate court records.
There's land records. There's land records.
Land, this labor contract, that they had for Ava's.
Fantastic. Bounty records for soldiers. I could go on and on.
Yes. Now, Angela, why do you suppose that they went straight to the census, the slaveholder census? Why do you think they did that? Do you think they had the other records, but time just didn't permit, or does it make?
Well, I might say that. I might say that if that was the only episode I'd ever seen.
Oh, I see.
Yes. However, I can go back to previous seasons, and I can call up episodes where, particularly, we all saw the word, this might be your ancestor.
Yes.
Our genealogists feel that this could be.
Yeah.
However, you would not do that to a person off of a passenger ship, and the manifest has no names. You would never, ever, ever do it.
Yeah.
But in addition to that, in previous episodes, I have seen episodes where a guest was told, that is your ancestor. And I have seen an episode where a person said, that right there, there's your great-great-grandmother at the age of 6, pointing to a male child. Whoa.
Oh. Oops.
Ouch. So, yeah. Now, I guess the question is, could they have shared more? Sure, we don't know what gets lost.
Well, there's only so much you can show in 52 to 55 minutes, and
Correct.
I know that they used more than the census records or labor records, or they showed a good sampling between, if you looked at all 3 of the people in the show, and deeds. Well, if you found one for one of them, they might have found that for the other 2 as well, but they're giving a smidgen, from the thousands of hours that they spend on it. So
correct, very correct. I think also it's important just to understand that the slave census is not a slave census.
Right.
It's
That's
not
why
a census of the enslaved.
Yes.
It's got the
Absolutely.
owners on there.
And that's the
Yes.
point. Then why, with a person who had ancestors who were enslaved, are you going to show them a piece of paper where some individual is listed with a tick mark and say, well, this could possibly, wow, you would not reduce a passenger off of a boat from Liverpool to nothingness, to a blank line.
And I think your point is so well taken, because a lot of people watch the show who are not genealogists, but they want to, find their own records, and they may jump to these conclusions because of that on the show.
And we as genealogists, we heard this maybe, but the person who's the non-genealogist, they're sitting back. That what they hear is, this is my ancestor. Right. That little tick mark.
Yes.
Really?
Yeah. Well, they in defense of, they did say on just the one, not the other slave schedule, but on the one, they said now it's the owner's name, and it gives the age and gender and color. So Pickney was the name at age 14. But I did not like how they said maybe.
I put it this way. I wonder if the team had, as I said, the immigrant client as opposed to the person who was enslaved. Would they use that same terminology? Because maybe is not proof.
Right. Maybe is not
evidence. That does not meet whatever proof standard one wants to use.
Exactly.
It's not.
So that's
and then the inference of, you just stop at the slave schedule.
And you stop. And you stop. My goodness, you're just getting going. This is wow.
Exactly.
If anything, now of course there's a challenge many people do have in terms of identifying the correct slaveholder. That wasn't a second concern. Oh, your last name is Mack or Jones or Jenkins. All right, let's go find Mr. Jenkins on this list of slaveholders.
Yes.
Whoa. Are you going to say that then the enslaved always kept the name of the last known slaveholder, when early studies have been conducted where in most cases they did not?
Right.
I know that a colleague to many of us here in Maryland wrote a book about the 7th U.S. Colored Infantry out of Maryland, and she had found records where slaveholders were identified with this particular unit, and a majority of them, 85%, did not have the same name.
It's really a big assumption, isn't it, with African American research, that you find a name that matches. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's often presented as a strategy, and I would be concerned about that a bit.
Well, and we've talked about this in our, in other episodes and our other chats too, how, not giving the whole picture. I'd rather see, concentration on more, just one. Don't do 3 people.
I know, that's hard.
So you can, you can go, but it is what it is. But I was so glad that they did branch off a bit and go into like the Haiti side for Ava.
Right.
And then they went into the Hawaiian side of Janet Mock.
Right.
And I'm trying to think with Ta-Nehisi, they did Maryland and Virginia, but that was about it, but I'm glad that they showed, they can't do everything for everyone. And
well, that's correct.
But at least to see, my ears perked up, Haiti, because it's, how often do we hear about how that work is done?
Well, I think particularly when you're dealing with people, when you're dealing with Louisiana, you've got a rich, colorful map of the globe right there in Louisiana. But in particular, any individual, and by the way, many of us, we were watching together on a Facebook group when the show was airing. And of course, we heard the words, "You're finding a free person in your ancestry is extremely rare."
I was going to ask you about that.
It's not.
Can you please set the record straight here, right here and now, and please correct that. Let us hear you say that.
Well, it is not extremely rare. to find people who were free before 1860. And one should not assume that the 1870 census is the first census that listed people of color or African Americans. Well, we have been in the census since 1790. So, and that's the beginning, the first time the census was conducted. Now, anyone from Louisiana, if you've spent a month in Louisiana, you know a lot about that history. And individuals who certainly have free people of color in their ancestry, they know that they're going to go towards, in fact, some of the records you're going to use will be in French. Some of those records will be in Spanish as well. And of course in English. And many of the free people in Louisiana definitely came from Saint-Domingue. And it's something that's not a surprise to anyone. And it's I guess it's important to understand that you can't take a paintbrush and paint it all over America and say, okay, this is my African American paintbrush. Okay, you were slaves.
Exactly.
Okay, these are the Irish. Okay, you came because the Irish famine only.
Exactly.
And you were here. And so we can't do that with any ethnic group. And the lives of people in Louisiana are dramatically different from the lives of people in Charleston.
Sure.
The lives of people in Charleston are uniquely different from those of us who have ancestors from Indian Territory. And their lives are different from those who lived in coastal New England. So you cannot escape bringing in the history and the culture and the regional history. And so it is important to incorporate that. But that's good genealogy. That's not something that's a trick. That's a special thing.
Right.
Oh my gosh, you've got to incorporate all that if you are a serious researcher. If you are doing good genealogy, well, then you're going to say, what's unique? If a person is from Mississippi, well, hey, don't forget, besides the census, pull out the educable children's list and study those. They were conducted in the years following the Civil War up to the 1900s. Make sure that a person is going to be looking for their ancestors there. You know, there's so many unique things in every unique community. And the culture is just as important. The culture, if you come from the Mississippi Delta, oh my gosh, rich culture, rich history, and many wonderful narratives to share and to tell. I can hope that maybe some of that was shared. I don't know. I was not there for the taping. We saw it as viewers. But in case after case, to make certain statements, it's rare to find free people in African American families. Well, really? Oh, it's not the case. So these are things that we need to know. But I want to say one thing.
Go ahead. Well, I was just going to say.
I had one thing I wanted to say.
Well, I was going to say, you know, you probably, let your clients know. I teach my classes. You need to know the area at the time your ancestors were there. You need to know the history. You need to know the lay of the land. You know, literally, you need to know what was happening when and how they were affected. And if you can't find something that says your particular person's name, you know, then look around and see what they're saying with that you find in someone else's record, because your person was still there at the same time.
And whatever happened in that region affected more than one family. And, you know, if you were living in New Orleans 10 years ago, you have a Katrina story to tell.
Exactly.
If you lived in the 1880s in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, you have the Johnstown flood to talk about. And if you lived in Baltimore in 1918, you have the influenza epidemic to talk about. And it affected everyone who was there. And that should be part of that narrative. And also the fact that there, you know, things vary from family to family, just like things vary from region to region. And it's very, very important. And if you don't have that unique micro history, that unique story about that one family, then tell the regional story, because they are part of it. And it's so important.
And then, and also too, the travel, the migration, you know, they just didn't pick up and plop over here and then pick up and plop over here. You know, it's like, well, how did they get, you know, I had so much fun, you know, doing that with, in my last book, it was on my grandmother's side, my maternal grandmother, or well, yeah, my mom's mom. And So to say how her parents got from, you know, the East Coast to the Midwest, you know, it's the same thing. You know, you may not have something that says specifically this, and this, but you need to study that. You need to know you can add that to your story because you've researched that area. You've researched how they got from point A to point B and maybe why.
How did they travel? What was that journey like?
Right.
Were they on a wagon train? You know, were they, you know, what was that like? Have you ever sat on a wagon? You know, have you ever done a hay ride? That's a bumpy ride. Imagine, you know, pioneers going westward.
Right.
At any period in time. Well, they were tough people. Everyone has that in their narrative, and it should be incorporated and brought into. But I wanted to make one thing about the slave schedule, as Sherry was saying, you know, the slaveholder census. It's important, though, to understand some things to do. When you find your ancestor, okay, my ancestor owned one slave or 20 slaves or whatever, I think it is important, number one, and I think it's something that we in the genealogy community need to start to say and to lay out some steps. Okay, you found this. Can you identify this one person? Can you identify these 15 people? Can you identify these 25 people? Because they should be identified. Because you know where those answers are? Perhaps in your family papers, perhaps in your family Bible, perhaps in that estate inventory that you have when great-granddaddy died. Those names exist. And
they do.
That is where they can be found. And then once you have found those names, please share those names.
Exactly.
We're waiting for those names.
Yes.
And it's so very important. And that needs to be a step that we all take the initiative to say, okay, you found them, find them, and these are the places to find them. Probate records, okay, they exist. And then once you have found them, share them. And there are multiple platforms and places to share them. And that's where we begin to work cooperatively as a community. Because beyond that, going back in time, once I get to identifying that last slaveholder, the process is the same as yours. I'm going to still follow those same individuals through the same court records and the same courthouses and the transfers of slaves. Even on a slave schedule, if you see that 1 or 2 or 10 are now fugitives from the state, then, oh, wow, they had some runaways. Hold it. No, they were freedom seekers, number one. They were not runaways. They're seeking freedom, which is more speaks to their humanity, as opposed to running away from a system as abnormal as it was legislated as something normal, but it wasn't. But they're freedom seekers. Well, what did they do when all of a sudden, oh, Henry has run away? They went to the newspapers.
That's right.
So find the corresponding newspaper in your county, and because that person is invisible as a tick mark on that slave census, so that slaveholder census of 1850 and 60. But when he or she ran away, oh, wanted, runaway, Toby with a scar on his cheek, not just his name, his description, short guy, kind of bow legs, answers to this name, walks with a limp. You get more detail.
As we saw last night, the one was branded. They showed one of them. Yes, they showed one of those. Sorry, on the episode. So,
absolutely. But again, it's one of those things that there are methods of finding. If there's someone ran away, then pull up the newspaper to find the runaway ad. And then I guess that final step I would encourage anyone to do who descends from a slaveholder, find that family in freedom. Find them because they were attached to your family. They supported your family through their labor. Find them in freedom and complete that story. And I think that helps all of us.
Well, and I saw that in this episode. I definitely saw that. You know, they made a point. You know, I was in Ta-Nehisi's where you know the owner gave her the freedom. She was given the acres of land, and then it went further than that. I mean, when I only noted up until the 1870 census, so what What records were after that, I didn't note. I know it's a shock, but but I stopped. I know, but the real estate value then $3,000. It's like, oh my gosh, I don't care who you are. That's a lot of money.
It's a lot of money.
And so it's like, I got that warm, comfortable feeling, you know, happy feeling. And that's what we want to, like you said, I do that with everyone, telling my students, telling clients. I said, you know, you may stop at this certain point, but you need to pick it up and bring them, like you said, bring them out of freedom or into freedom, and into freedom and into their own, and all the way, you know, and even their descendants, all the way to current day. You know, people forget, I think they're so busy looking for the ancestors. What about bringing it forward, doing the descendancy research as well?
And I think it's another thing too, that one should not put sole pressure on the descendants of slaveholders. There were individuals who will say, well, my folks owned no slaves. We were just poor folks. Okay. So you look in 1860 and you find your family, but did they support the system? Exactly. Were they overseers?
Exactly.
Were they field managers? If you're in the Mississippi Delta, poor whites were not in that particular field, okay, but perhaps they worked for that slaveholder, or was one a country doctor who tended to the slaves? Was one supporting that system? And so there are a lot of things that we've got to become comfortable talking about it. You know, I guess hopefully we don't have to wait 300 years. People can talk about burning the witches in Salem. Oh, so many years have passed by. Oh, look at this. I've even heard people say, oh, my ancestor was a witch. At them like, really? But people don't have that sense of discomfort. Hopefully we should not wait 300 years to get to a level of comfort to really talk about this period, upon which, well, it was an economic base also for certainly a good portion of the country. But it happened, it's real. So let's deal with it. But we in the community must also take responsibility for bringing forth methods of
Angela, you've encouraged me to try even harder. I have taken some names and put them on the slave name roll index. Is that what it's called? Project.
There are several, right?
Yes, and I've done that, but you've encouraged me to do even more. So I appreciate you doing that.
Thank you, and we certainly appreciate saying those names.
The big bad timer went off.
I heard it.
But I didn't want to interrupt the wonderful conversation. But thank you so much, Angela. You have enlightened and given enthusiasm so much that it's like, oh my gosh, you know, I can't get back to my own research because that doesn't pay the bills, so I got to tend to client work and so forth. But I will make it a point to make some time and pull out from the Lair and the Kratzer ancestors that I did find that they had slaves and what the names are, and I'll get in touch with you or Sherry to pass on those names.
Share them. Thank you. That is greatly appreciated.
To put that out to the community, and I apologize for my not knowing about that. That's how we learn. We can't know everything.
Ask questions. Absolutely.
Yeah, so I will make it a point to do that, to pull that information out. And
thank you.
And we encourage all of you to do the same. And you know, I got goosebumps, you know, from listening to Angela give us all these tips and resources and information, and like we always try to do, you know, about going in depth with your ancestors. So please do that. If you have any questions, feel free to drop us a line in the comments below, or send us a quick email at info@theinDepthGenealogist.com. And until, I want to thank Sherry for being here and for her wonderful invite out to Angela. Thank you so much, Angela. I hope you'll think about maybe if we have this opportunity again that you can come back.
I would love to. Thank you for having me.
Oh, good. Thank you. And we wish you all a wonderful evening and a fond farewell until next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.